Right, so this is another happiness class based on Islamic principles. I got my good friend Claire, who's a secular Quranist. Basically, just means she's not a Muslim, but she finds a lot of value in the Quranic or Islamic teachings. Is that right, Claire?
Yes, I do. Secular Quranism is basically Sharia for non-Muslims.
Cool. We're going to jump straight into the topic. How do you find love? And I'm going to talk about a couple of ideas, and I'm going to try to whiz through the three main ideas, and then you can, Claire, latch on to anything that you think particularly interests you. There are three main elements why in Islamic cultures lasting relationships or relationships are lasting, and you can see the results of that through Muslims having more children than even in the West, where there are Muslims in the West, they're having more children than everybody else. And also it's true for the same holds for other very religious people like Orthodox Jews or the few very serious Christians. So let's whiz through some of the ideas. So the first idea, and by the way, in the description is the document that summarizes all the ideas. Quite a lot of stuff there. I'm going to try to
I did
whiz
read
through.
it.
You had a read? Yeah, I thought I saw
Yes.
somebody checking it out. Um,
I
so,
like the idea of let's stop looking for a soulmate in another human being, and our true
yeah,
soulmate is God.
fantastic. That is number one. And that really relieves the pressure from people. So let me um, quickly go through a verse of the Quran. I'm not even going to go through all the many verses that I've collected together that kind of make the point. Um, and even what you see in the summary is very short. I mean, really summarized. But anyway, uh, there's a verse of the Quran that describes the universe as a palace paved smooth with slabs of glass. Already, and maybe that sounds really off-putting because it's too like abstract. But very quickly, the idea is that when we look at the universe, for some reason, I don't know if you find this, Claire, that you find nature peaceful. Do you find nature peaceful by any chance?
Yes, it can be.
Cool.
Yes.
I mean, scientifically, or as according to psychologists, being in nature is more powerful than being taking any antidepressant, pharmaceutical antidepressant. So there's something very powerful about it. But what is it? Why would blades of grass or leaves have that effect, or just looking at the sea have that effect? It's because according to this idea in the Quran, is that this universe, when you look at the beauty of a leaf, where it doesn't really have an apparent beauty in itself, what you're looking at indirectly is the power of God. So the God is described as a fast flowing stream of water. I didn't give the whole reference because I was trying to make it really short in the document I gave. But anyway, the idea is I'm going to kind of read this kind of almost poetical thing written by somebody known as the Promised Messiah, who commented on this verse, and it says, and I won't try to make this long, but I do think it's pretty brilliant. The same attraction comes into play when a person feels love for another. This is midway through a paragraph. It is the reflection of the attraction that is inherent in man's nature towards God, as if he is in search for something that he misses, the name of which he has forgotten, and which he seeks to find in one thing or another, which he takes up from time to time. The world is like a palace, the floor of which is paved with smooth slabs of glass, under which flows a rapid current of water. Thus, these heavenly bodies, like the sun and the moon, etc., are the smooth, transparent slabs of glass under which a great power is in operation, like the fast flowing current of water. It is a great mistake on the part of those who worship these heavenly bodies that they attribute to them, which is manifested by the power that operates behind them. So, why am I talking about this? Very quickly, we we put a lot of pressure to find love. We put a lot of pressure on other mere human beings to be God-like. We don't realize that, but we go, oh, that person's perfect, this person completes me, and all this kind of stuff. This is completely unreasonable. Just like if I said to you, Claire, are you special?
I like to think so.
Okay, but let me put it another way. Like, are you, I don't know, like an angel?
Oh no.
Yeah, that's like unreasonable to consider anybody to be that special to put all their hopes in. And that's what we do as human beings. So essentially, I ask in this document, how do you find your soulmate? And your soulmate is God. And that might put people off. They go, oh God, I want to feel a soulmate. That's a human being, right? But if you have that attitude, you can love another human being reasonably. Okay. And the way I put it is, if you know, and it does help to know the nature of love. Like, what is this powerful force that you feel that you need to have? It is this indirect need for God, right? And so once you realize that, you divert your energies correctly towards God. But does that mean you don't have any attraction or connection with another human being? And I would like to say we don't have a soulmate. I'm just going to ship, sailor mentality. What's the word? Terminology. You should have a crewmate, one of many people who fulfill different needs, psychological or social needs. So your husband or wife doesn't have to be everything. It's just something, complete part of your life, a necessary part. If you have that attitude, then you'll remember also to have lots of other friends. And those lots of other friends will be useful in different ways. So like intellectually, like let's say Elon Musk, he usually marries a bunch of bimbos historically. And there's not much, you can't really compare to him in terms of like, you're not going to find a wife who's necessarily what's it called, a rocket scientist. You're kind of really limiting your pool if you have that idea that the person you marry has to understand everything you're doing in your job and absolutely, you know, have the same hobbies and everything else. So it's really unreasonable. And so my first point there is like, just to make it easy to find love. Right now, Westerners make it impossible to find love. How do you feel about that first idea?
Are you saying that they have impossibly high standards?
Yeah, they're impossibly high standards because they're putting impossible burdens on another human being to be perfect, which doesn't, no human means perfect. No human can be everything you need.
True.
Yeah.
Well, they're not that great themselves.
Exactly right. That's why I kind of asked you a question, are you like perfect, whatever? Is the idea is we're not perfect. We know we're not perfect. Why do we expect somebody else to be perfect? It's a silly idea. So that's one. I'm going to rush through things and then we can kind of stop on a point that you particularly find interesting. So the next point is, do we need love to be happy? And I suppose will quote this really nice saying of Prophet Muhammad, but I'm not sure. Let's see how useful people find it. So you will not find paradise, and that means happiness in this life and the next, until you have faith. And you will not have faith until you love each other. Then he says, shall I show you something that if you did, you would love each other? And then you know, the people, the congregation said, yeah, sure. And then he said, spread the greeting of peace between yourselves. So Muslims have to say, whenever they come across a total stranger in the community, wherever, they say, Assalamu alaikum, means peace be upon you. But it doesn't literally, they're not just empty words. There's a lot of meaning behind it, according to different sayings of Prophet Muhammad. One of them is that when you say peace, that means you're saying to the other person that you are at peace or safe from my hands and my tongue. And you don't just say peace be upon you, you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, which means also the blessings of God. Basically, you wish them well. Okay. So what's the point in this is, if I can get through as quick as possible, is something like this. There's a couple of stages to happiness. Okay. And the first stage is to indiscriminately love people. right? Wish indiscriminately, wish everybody peace. And so we're in a society which really doesn't like other human beings. I keep asking other people, and you get lots of comments even in my live streams like, I don't like people, I don't want to be friends with people. If I say you should smile at a total stranger, especially in England, people go, what? That's a bit creepy, which is really sad, because over here that's normal, because people have been taught we're all brothers and sisters and we should smile at each other, and this is an expectation based in Islam. And even the Christians kind of adopt that or realize that culture. So if you take that first step of wishing people well from your heart, truly meaning it, then you begin to understand the real idea of love, which is basically kindness. Let me ask you a question, Claire. Is it love if you expect something back from them? If you love somebody, you only love them because you're going to get something back from them. Is that love?
It's a business transaction.
It's a business transaction. That's not really love. So the easier way to understand love is kindness, because Westerners have kind of screwed up the idea of love. They've turned it into something mystical, and usually they expect something back, and then they're really upset when they don't get that thing back perfectly. Like, why doesn't, I said I love you, and then the person didn't say I love you, like blah, blah. I don't know, all this other stuff, whatever people expect a lot nowadays, right? So there's that idea of you need love. Why do you need love? Where even as psychologists will tell you we need connection. There's lots of great material coming out. There's somebody called Johan Hari. I didn't mention it in this particular document, but he says we've lost many connections, and one of them is connection between us human beings. So this act is absolutely amazing. Just saying peace be upon you connects all people, but also teaches people what love is. Again, it's indiscriminate. It's not like I love you only, or I'm nice to you only if you do X, Y, and Z. If you have that attitude, it's you get into a negative spiral where nobody fulfills the requirement of being deserving of your love. Do you get that idea? Like, if you are, let's say, generous, that's a better way to start off than having lots of rules like you only deserve love if you do X, Y, and Z, which is, I think, the Western idea at the moment. Have I lost you?
Well, yes, I suppose. I mean, tactically, you're supposed to say, "Oh, it's free," no obligation. Because the moment you sort of say, "Oh, you'll only get this if I get this other thing that I want from you back," then the person will say, "No, thanks. I don't want to be obliged to you."
Yeah.
So,
and the rules keep piling up. It's like once you make one rule, like for you to be acceptable, then you start building up more and more rules, and you end up blocking out everybody. That's the experience I've seen. Would you agree? There's that sort of kind of attitude in the West that everybody's become toxic, and everybody who says, I mean, statistically, that's true. I think it's becoming worse and worse. People are being blocking out more and more people because hardly anybody is eligible for people. We're all too easily or eager to block people out. Or do you mean?
yes. I mean, gender relations is in a very bad state, and that's why people are not marrying and therefore not having legitimate children. And I think it boils down to gender roles, and then we have the question of people's pronouns that they want others to respect. So it's all about Western identity.
Yeah. Yes,
and if they don't know if they're male or female, they're going to get things wrong and piss each other off.
Yeah, so you're totally right. Statistically, gender relationships are absolutely terrible. People are more lonely than ever before. There's all sorts of statistics that say, for example, what was it? 50% of men, this is all over Europe at the moment, and in America in the West, that 50% of men under 30 are not even trying to look for relationships and haven't had sex for a year. All sorts of crazy. There's so many statistics are basically saying we're incredibly lonely. Why are we incredibly lonely? Like when we're surrounded by millions of people.
Each other. They
They
fear
fear each
having
other.
their
Yeah.
feelings hurt.
Yeah, and why do you feel have your feelings hurt? Because you have an expectation that somebody has to do a certain thing. So I'm used to Westerners being upset by all sorts of tiny things, like this person looked at me the wrong way, and this person did that, and whatever, and everybody's getting upset for the tiniest of things. And for me, I barely even notice if people are looking at me the wrong way or the right way, whatever. And that's by training of not expecting things in the first place, because that's the definition of love, being nice, even if somebody is rude to you. Because and there's lots of reasons to love people even if they're rude to you, because in short, have you heard the phrase hurt people hurt people?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So those people who are being rude to you just are unhappy and need your pity and love, even though you are not rude to them and say I pity
And
you.
they tend to lash out because they're suspicious and bitter, and maybe they just adopt I'm going to hurt them before they hurt me kind of
Exactly. They're very
attitude.
scared. That's so true. That's so true. Okay. And psychologists talk about that a lot. Yeah. It's just kind of like self-preservation. I'm going to push somebody away because internally they don't feel they deserve love and stuff like that. Right. So that's very true. So the point this saying of Prophet Muhammad said, just to summarize really quickly, it goes something like this. First stage is you need to love indiscriminately. It opens up your heart to kind of just like life and stuff like that. When you don't do that, you're just narrowing your world, and literally people end up by themselves, lonely in their flats with Netflix and computer games and whatever it is they do, right? So that's stage one. It opens up the world to you. And then what did this thing say? So that opens up this idea of love. And when you have love, the other benefit is that you learn from people. So you probably notice there's all these echo chambers. People only listen to people who totally agree with them. So essentially, we don't learn from people we hate. So if you love everybody, you can learn really quickly. And why would you want to learn quickly? Because you want to develop wisdom. If you are wisdom, I would describe as knowing how to navigate life, how to live life. And most people don't. You have to assume when you're born, you don't know anything. That's quite a fair assumption. So you wouldn't be in a rush to learn how to live life properly, pick up wisdom. And you're only going to do that if your mind is open, and your mind is only open when your heart is open, when you're actually loving people. Does that make any sense?
Yes, of course. You have to be open to liking people, but there's something called what attachment anxiety syndrome or something like that,
Okay.
which means people don't want to become too fond of somebody in case that person leaves them.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So, okay. So again, that comes back to the idea of two things. Firstly, I'm not going to say there are different kinds of love where you necessarily do become attached, and you do have to choose carefully who you become really attached to. But also, there is another kind of love that you can give, where you're not particularly attached to them, which is the kind of love we were just talking about a second ago, which is a non-transactional kind of love. Like, I'm going to be kind to you. I feel sorry for you. You don't have to say that again, like I said before. But I think this is a very common kind of love that you'll find in a lot of countries. Like over where I'm in Jordan, if I go to a shop, people go out of their way, even if they're not making money, to help me out, to find out, and they'll tell me, go to this shop or go to that shop, and this is where you're going to get what you need and all this kind of stuff. And then you become a lot more open. So I'm just walking just on the way to my flat here in the city, and the guy who's kind of standing outside his shop, he goes, "Oh, look at that flower. It's amazing, isn't it?" Like, you wouldn't hear somebody in Tesco's, working in Tesco's, standing outside their shop and say that to you, would you? Do you know what I mean? It's a different experience. Right. So, like, and that's a man. It's like over in England, you're not allowed to express kind of like, "Oh, do you like that flower? It's amazing, isn't it?" You just don't talk like that. But people here talk like that normally. So two things: you need love for connection, and also you need love to learn to really be happy. if you develop that, to learn wisdom that enables you to be happy, to really understand life. So that's one thing. And then finally, on the question of how do you make love last, and this is the thing about gender relationships are really important. Okay, so let's go to kind of the core verse, because I won't read the other two. I'll kind of paraphrase and explain them. The verse goes, men are guardians, and the word in Arabic is always vastly more meaningful than anything you can get in English. The word guardian describes somebody who protects, provides, and guides. So men are guardians over women because Allah, that's the name of the one true God, has made some of them excel others, and because they, the men, spend of their wealth. So virtuous women are those who are obedient and guard the secrets of their husbands with Allah's protection. So, of course, people say, oh, that's sexist. And I say sexism is fantastic. It just means categorization, understanding, just like you do with cats, dogs, giraffes. You categorize them, you understand them, you don't pretend to think they're all the same. That's a really bad idea. So men and women are clearly not the same. You just have to open your eyes and you can see that. And if the bodies are different, then it makes sense that their brains are different and they can do different things, just like a cat, has a different body and it eats different food. Clearly its brain works differently, is designed for its body. Okay, so would you agree that men and women are different, their brains are going to be different, they're going to be good at different things?
Oh, absolutely, because
Yeah.
I mean that's the whole idea of this partnership, that they should be complementary, meaning that they one does something and the other does another that helps them. Like, you go out to work, I stay home to look after the children.
Yeah, that's called, like in economics, that's called, what's it called? Specialization, right? That's the reason why your brain surgeon isn't the plumber, because if they were both wouldn't work. I mean, you'd do both really badly, and you'd have, you really don't want the plumber being your brain surgeon. So there's a common sense that most people in the West, unfortunately, have forgotten, but they're being forced to learn because the whole species, the whole society is collapsing and everybody hates each other. So hopefully somebody will learn, or some people are learning. That's why Islam is the fastest growing religion in the West. So very quickly, it might sound really sexist, for example. It's not too surprising that men protect, but there's people who'd argue against that. It's not too, I mean, a tiny bit of studying would make you realize it's better that men provide. Okay, and the reason is, statistically, men are interested in things like STEM.
But it gives them a purpose in life.
Say again? Well, it gives them a purpose, but it's aligned with their purpose, not a random purpose. And I do agree with your point that men feel purposeless at the moment because they're being told a false doctrine of feminism, which says basically everybody's the same, or generally it says women are better somehow anyway, or men are useless, they haven't got a particular purpose and stuff like that, which is ridiculous and doesn't fit in with psychology at all. So men are better at something called STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Essentially, that makes them good at industrialization. Essentially, if you're good at industrialization, say you're good at computer programming, that means you can program a robot or a piece of software to do a job of 1,000 people. Therefore, you can get the money from 1,000 people. Essentially, men have always done that. They've built the world that we see around ourselves. Okay, that doesn't mean men are better. It only feels like men are better according to a Western mindset, which bases everything based on money. But not everything's based on money. What about love? You can't buy love. As soon as you buy love, it's worth nothing. It's like when you have sex with a prostitute, it no longer has the same value as you have sex with somebody who actually cares for you. Does that make sense? Not everything can be evaluated in capitalism.
No, but I suppose if you wanted to evaluate the worth of a wife, it's sort of, well, how many persons can she be in one person?
How many can she be?
Like, prostitute, cleaner, nanny.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Escort girl, And it probably adds up quite a lot if you think, oh, for every job that I want a woman to do, I have to hire a separate person and pay them going rate, and that would
Sure,
add
I
up quite
mean,
a lot.
there's definitely value in that, but there's also some intangible values, like the food you get from your wife is different from the food you get in the restaurant. It might not be as good, but it translates an idea of love, like she did this for you, sort of thing, in a way, it, even if it's not cooked the best way. So and not everything's translatable in capitalism, and
Yes, it's
that's
home
probably,
cooking,
yeah,
cooked in your kitchen for you, her
yeah,
husband.
yeah. And in a capitalistic thing, you might say, "Oh, that's bad because they're using my equipment to cook my food." What's the value in that? Because that's that's the whole thing. You can't translate these things, and that's, for example, explains why women's jobs are valued less in capitalistic societies. It explains the gender pay gap, because it explains different things. I mean, one thing's that caring and being nice and things like that generally don't seem to have enough value in capitalism. So capitalism doesn't put the right amount of, I don't know, value in things because
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
bit simpler. Yeah. But also there is a sort of a correct thing about capitalism, that it does value men's ability to do things efficiently and do them really well. Yeah, make bridges and whatever, and make software and stuff like that, right? So this verse of the Quran does allow for the fact that the Quran, as it says, there are some people, what does it say? Because Allah has made some of them excel others. So generally, men excel women in these things. Now, if there's women excel in some other, like a particular man in coding, for example, or more efficient somehow, it doesn't, the exception doesn't make the rule, as it were. And I would say that that lady needs to understand that it's quite possible that whenever I've seen women in work, they lose out big time, and what they do is they put a lot of pressure. I mean, so many people come to my mind. I suppose, I don't know, all the famous people like Margaret Thatcher and whatever. They're really. Do you remember, like, she collapsed doing a speech and all that kind of stuff? There's so many examples of women, like, they really don't do well in business. Like, if they do well or in public life, it costs them a lot more than it costs a man. And men are naturally eager to work in the outside world. There's a study done where they asked women if they would look to lose their job and they could work at home. Most women preferred to be at home, whereas men were the opposite. And there's all sorts of other statistics, like, for example, if you have a stay-at-home dad, they're far more likely to be divorced. That just demonstrates that the women don't really like men to be at home. There are these
Yes,
biological
encroaching
positions.
on her territory and all that.
Well, no, it's not even that, because a woman might think she wants to go out to work. So she goes out to work and the man stays at home. Those situations, men are more likely to be divorced. So they might think that they might like a certain arrangement, but in reality, it doesn't work out. Like, deep down, it doesn't agree with either of them, I think.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
because she loses her respect for him.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So it's a weird. I mean, it's a really interesting. There's Diary of a CEO. Do you ever watch that podcast?
No.
Anyway, so there was a number one, I don't know, some sort of marriage counselor or something like that, and she likes to be liberal. She doesn't want to have this kind of idea, these are the sex roles. But when she was asked, if you go on a date and the man doesn't pay for the date, how would you feel? And she said, I don't know what it is, but something inside me says I would be really annoyed and I wouldn't want a second date with them. There's something ingrained in, I think, especially women, they're more aligned with their nature that they can't escape. And I think that's kind of correct, because men have to kind of deal with women's jobs are always the same, I would say. Take care of the children, raise the children, have babies, all this kind of stuff. It doesn't really change. But in the whichever age men are brought up in, they have to create technology, they have to adapt, so they are more adapted. So I don't want to go into that too much, but how do you feel about this idea? Women are more close to their nature, they don't change too much, whereas men do.
I I think that the gender roles are already define each sex in that, for all kinds of practical reasons, the woman should stay at home because home is where the children are, and home is where the husband comes back to after working, and somebody's got to make it nice to
Yeah,
return
and
to.
it's true, and you have to change those gender roles at great cost. You have to pay for, no, there's a kind of monetary cost of paying a lot of money for child minding, etc., if the woman has to go out. And I
Then
think
you have to pay for the cleaner, and
exactly a million other jobs. It's known as the two-wage, I can't remember, there's all these different names, so many studies that show that it's impractical. And yeah, so it goes on. But there's also a psychological so many massive psychological costs. For example, if you're a child raised by somebody who's not your mum, you're not touched as much when you're growing up. When you're brought up, obviously, people don't care about you. People who are not your mum will not care about you as much, so they won't pick you up when you're a little baby and all this kind of stuff, and that leads to all sorts of psychological harm. So these are really obvious things, and we have to go. I totally agree that the gender roles are fixed, and we try to escape from them at great cost, all sorts of cost. But anyway, so here I want to jump into some quick ideas. One of the reasons why relationships don't last in the West, and the reason I brought up these different roles, is that we have unreal expectations of the other person, which I kind of touched on already. Like, we want the other person, the husband or wife, to be, I don't know, our best friend, understand, or intellectually understand everything we're doing, also be the cook, also our sex buddy, whatever you want to call it. All these millions of different roles is completely unrealistic. So that's one idea. Another beautiful idea in the Quran, one of the words used for the pair or your spouse, is also used for the other shoe. So technically, it means your other pair, but it can be referred to. That term can be used for the other shoe. And why is that really important? So I want to say this in as short way as possible. It goes something like this. The point of a relationship, unlike what it is known in the West, which is to, in the West, a marriage is very self-indulgent. In Islamic understanding, is to further your journey towards God or go on a journey of life. So I love the metaphor of your spouse being your other shoe, because if you had two left shoes, you wouldn't get very far. But if you have a right shoe and a left shoe, you walk together. Do you know what I mean? It's a beautiful idea.
The other half.
Yes, the other half. And it's more than the other half, because I like this idea of jawaz, which is the word. It's the other half that's different to you. That's why I was talking about, if it was just the other half, then you're not needed because it's just a duplicate of you. But you don't want a duplicate of you. You want, and this is the relationships experts say that most people's mistakes is that they look for somebody who's just like them. You don't want somebody just like you. You want somebody who complements you, because we all have loads of failings and weaknesses, and if you got somebody who's different to you, they fill in those gaps. So for example, me, I'm you might see, okay, I'll describe myself as creative, right? Like I have loads of different ideas. That might sound like a good thing, but it can have lots of bad things, because I might be trying too many risky things or whatever. So you need my wife. My wife is kind of really the opposite. She does all the normal, boring stuff, and she gets things done, and she does the core foundational stuff. She does the paperwork, which I hate, all this kind of stuff, right? So it's very important to be opposites. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think in terms of relationships? Do we find identical somebody who's the same as us, or somebody who complements us?
Somebody who complements us, because it is the nature of relationships to think, oh, he does this thing that I really can't do and which I hate. And, the husband thinks, well, I would like to stay, all day looking after the children. And I'm so grateful that there's somebody to do this thing that I don't want to do.
Absolutely.
I think that, yes. So that is a sound basis for even a business partnership.
Very true. Yeah. And nowadays, the reason why I bring that up and why this is such an important point is because people live in echo chambers and they only talk to people who are exactly like them because they can't stand anybody who has a slightly different opinion of them. They always look for people who are exactly like them. And then what happens? Because I'm trying to remember.
Competition, I think.
Yes.
It's sort of like, oh, I'm doing this. No, I'm doing this. I'm better at it than you, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. And also, you find if you're trying to find somebody who's your identical partner or whatever you call it, in reality, they won't be. It just takes a few moments or a month or a year, and you realize you're not the same. And then you're going to be disappointed that they're not identical to you. And guess what? Relationships end. Like, we have too many excuses for relationships to end. Okay, so that's that. And then what was there? There were so many different ideas. But yeah, so working together and this idea. Okay, so let's get into some of the more controversial ones. Like, why would men guide? Why are they chosen to guide? Because they're more level-headed. They don't let their emotions control them. Doesn't mean men are better. Like, I quite like it. I'm sure, I don't know if you know, but like, men quite like the slight craziness of women because we're really ordered and careful and thoughtful, and we have to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a nice compliment, and also it's not just the crazy, because that's kind of a disservice to women. It's like, my wife has a much better relationship with my kids than I do, like, just more connected. Like, even though she panics over stuff and my kids sometimes get annoyed about her panicking about every tiny thing, but she cares a lot more. She's a lot more involved and all this kind of stuff. So we're just completely different human beings. Men and women are completely different human beings. And just because a man is told that he's a guide, and it makes sense, if you're kind of more powerful, it's going to be harder for a woman to take control in the first place. It's just natural. But also, we're more level-headed, and every time I have a discussion with my wife, she'll say something, she'll make an argument, and the argument has no sense, like almost no sense at all, right? It's not that she's not intelligent.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. Okay. So let's say my mother-in-law, we had a discussion. She was trying to tell me something, and I'll try to work through. And then I'll try to remember. I've got a vague memory of another kind of discussion I had with my wife just before that, but I have to kind of dig it out of my memory. But yesterday, my mother-in-law was like saying, she's got a PhD, so she thinks she's really good at arguments, but she never made a clear argument ever. And it goes something like this, not in an insulting way, but it's just like, I don't think women are very good at arguments. It goes something like this. She said, she started off with, do you accept that Prophet Muhammad is your role model? And yes, sure. Okay, fine. Yeah. And then she jumped off to a completely different point and had no relation to her initial point. So it's like, but that has nothing to do with that. She said, but I was telling my 16-year-old that she can't wear long nails or something. I tell her what she can and can't wear and stuff like that in school because she ends up doing too much showing off, let's just say. So, and I said, like, what's that got to do with your first point? And she couldn't explain it. She couldn't connect her first point to a second point. And that's kind of typical. And if I was trying to think about what my wife was saying in the car, she didn't like the idea. Oh, yes. She said, we were talking about this particular verse. And I was saying, you're not a good woman if you're not obedient. Well, this verse, that's what I was telling her. And she's like, no, that can't be right. I said, that's what the verse of the Quran says. So what's your point? And then she said, okay, fine. That's what the Quran says. And I said, also, logically, what do you think? Like, no, I think that it wasn't just that point. Actually, the point wasn't that. The point was you're not a humble person if you're not obedient. Okay. And so let me explain that point. The point is, if God says, let's just say you already accept Islam, and God says, this person, a man, is supposed to be in charge because he's better able, then it stands, the reasoning follows that if he's more able, why would he not listen unless you're not humble? That's
Right.
it, really. Do you know what I mean? So if you already agree with the premise that the Quran is correct and God is correct and God has put X person in charge, why would you not listen to him? And it's for your own benefit anyway. That's what I would say. And anyway, she eventually agreed. But it was like, yeah.
Yes, I understand. Yes, it's a lawyer's point, I suppose. Yes.
It's annoying.
If you're arguing with me, you're not being obedient and humble, and therefore you're wrong. So shut up.
I gave her more reasoning than that, just like I did right now. But she did realize that kind of women do get emotional all the time. You can't go by that. And I whenever I have a discussion with her, I do give her XYZ, proper arguments. And I even said, for example, when we were having discussions, every time she made a good point, I would say, oh, that's a good point. And let me talk about that. But every time I made a good point, she wouldn't agree to it. She wouldn't say that's a good point. Do you know what I mean? Because it's kind of the need for women to be, don't like to lose arguments, right? I think you made a point about that. You said like it's a women's thing to not take responsibility or something like that. What was the sense? Do you remember making that argument?
It's a woman's prerogative to change her mind.
Yeah, you said something else, but I can't remember. But there is this kind of
power
thing
without responsibility is the prerogative of the whore, something like that.
Well, definitely, I don't think women are good at taking responsibility in the kind of the big sense, and they don't want to take responsibility. Men are good at taking care of, the house and stuff like that. So I think there is, and the idea of taking responsibility and also having a logical argument are kind of tied together. It's a bit like, I think the difference because I'm interested in business and stuff like that. When you're working for somebody, you're always whinging because the boss did this and the boss, but you could never be the boss because you're never good at taking responsibility. So I think women naturally feel at ease inside the house, and they like to whinge a little bit and stuff like that because it's easier to whinge and stuff like that. So when they have arguments, they know it doesn't even have to even make sense because they're just venting, and that's all it is. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, yes, I think a lot of people don't make sense. And I've been trying to get people to just learn the difference between a valid argument and a sound argument. And I spent months doing it one summer to somebody we both know. And I don't think he gets it. And it's like, who cares? Who cares about the arguments? Nobody cares about the arguments. And I think that this is just a comment on our times that we are being run by emotional women or men who behave or pander to emotional women who don't feel they have to make sense. They just have a tantrum and get their way.
Yeah, so men having lost their identity of becoming responsible people who have to be level-headed to run a family and stuff like that, that become like women. So it's true. I agree. Let me just see what JB Vance has got to say. Women are narcissistics and don't listen to any direction. She will bounce for any reason, and she doesn't feel attraction in the lead relationship when she doesn't find. Okay, so this is a really important idea, right? A point that I missed out earlier on. Okay, why do Muslim women generally stick to relationships more? Is because their obedience to the man is actually directly obedience to God. So the verse of the Quran that I missed out because I'm trying to be really short, it says, "Oh, ye who believe, obey Allah and obey His Messenger and those in authority among you." And authority, one of the authorities are men over women, according to the other verse I've already quoted. So they understand that it's in obedience to God that they're obedience to their husband. It doesn't mean their husbands are God. They're a lower form of obedience. So if their husband says something that's completely in contradiction to God, then they're wrong. But yeah, but I do feel like I have to explain Islam to my wife and other women. I think it might sound really sexist, but men are just better at explaining ideas more logically.
Because men operate on rules, and also men also have to obey other men in authority over them. And I suppose the idea of the difference between God and man is that God is always above man. And maybe these days people don't understand, or they think, oh, God is just a fictitious concept made up by men.
Very, really important. So important, because people think that the idea of God has no bearings on life, doesn't affect anything. I'm saying this is the most powerful idea, that if you don't believe in God, your relationships won't work. And that's why it brings me back to this idea that why is it that religious people's relationships last longer? It's because it's tied in very strongly with this concept that God exists, God is watching us. This whole relationship is not just some self-indulgent thing between us two. There's a bigger picture, there's a bigger cause that we're doing it for. It's not just our personal, I want this and I want that kind of thing. It doesn't really, it's not a great purpose. I think Nietzsche and some other people said, if you have a why, you can get through any how. If your why is really big, beyond like, oh, I just like that person's nose, and now I don't like that other person's nose because I saw somebody else's person's nose. And that's how psychology works, by the way, where there's no one standard of beauty. It's constantly developing depending on what you focus on. That's why you have office romance, for example, because you looked at that person for a long time, and then in your plastic mind decided that person really looks good. So anyway, the idea of beauty is not a constant. And so in short, the attraction, with the shell of a person is not much of a reason to stay together, because that will disappear. No, actually, it won't disappear. Let me explain. I'll explain how we can retain that. That's another important idea. But if you have a bigger why, then your relationship lasts. And religious people have a bigger why, and then they can get through any how. That is
a bigger what?
A bigger why, a bigger reason. I'm kind of quoting Nietzsche, because he said, if you have a why, you can get through any how.
I see. Conviction.
If you have a good reason, a purpose for doing something, the bigger your purpose, the more chances that you'll be able to do that thing. So if your purpose of having a relationship in the West, like as Westerners do, is because you just you fall in love with the external whatever of that person, the appearance of that person, that relationship is not going to last. It's not a very solid reason to be in a relationship with a person. But if your reason is really big, like essentially you're going to be, this is your journey, your eternal journey towards God. And this, just like I was describing earlier on, your husband, you as husband and wife, you're taking a journey towards God. And you might say, how is that journey towards God? Because it takes some effort to be kind, be patient. And these are all the qualities that develop your soul to become closer to God. This is the idea in Islam. Like in Islam, there's a saying of Prophet Muhammad, who said, marriage is half of faith. But that's paraphrasing. Have you ever heard any of those kind of ideas in Islam?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that marriage is a duty for Muslims.
Yes, right. And if you don't marry, you're not a Muslim, or you're not one of me. That's what Prophet Muhammad also said. There's all sorts of things like that. But essentially, marriage is not just a selfish thing. It's to develop a society, to have better children. Like there's another verse that I put, and those who say, our Lord, grant us of our wives and children the delight of our eyes, and make us a model for the righteous. So the whole point of the children is not just to have children and make you money, it's to like make them a model for other people, other good people who want to also follow and copy and become like that. You're demonstrating good values that other people should copy, so you create a better society. But also, I said that how do you, as the verse of the Quran said, keep your wives, let's say particularly, being the delight of our eyes? How do you do that? Remember I said our minds are plastic. So if you look at pornography, for example, what you're doing is you're training your mind to like every, whatever it is on your screen. And then that means that will train your mind away from liking your wife. That's just naturally what happens. And looking at pornography increases your chance of divorce. There's a statistic for that. So it's not surprising. So I suppose I should ask you a question. Do you think there's a way to maintain love with your spouse throughout your marriage?
What comes to mind is this statement, apparently in an old ancient Chinese statement about husbands and wives have no option but to behave towards each other in their own home, treating each other as honored guests, which doesn't sound very intimate,
Yeah.
but it probably works,
See, the thing is that Chinese proverb, because Chinese culture is very old, it worked when if a woman divorced her husband, she'd essentially be dead, because men and women depended biologically and whatever on each other a lot more in harsher harsher societies where you had to grow your own food and all this kind of stuff, and your children were your team and they were your labor, all this kind of stuff. And now we've developed into a society where that isn't exactly true, but you do when men and women, when they're separate, really do harm themselves. Men do more risky things. Women just go mental. I can't remember what the statistics are, but like left by themselves, their own chaos is self-harming. So they don't die immediately. So I suppose my point is that there is something beautiful to be created. So I suppose the honored guest thing has value. Like if you value each other and you honor each other and treat each other as honored guests as well. But it's like we come to a society where things are more subtle and you have more freedoms at your own detriment. Yeah, I suppose that's how I feel like.
Well, I mean, the rules are really there to stop us from just doing anything that comes into our head. I mean, we don't do things because of the mood of the moment, because then the moment passes and the mood passes and you're no longer in love with that person, after the moment has passed. So what you were saying earlier was that, if you want to have a relationship with a member of the opposite sex, choose carefully and don't just keep, pumping and dumping, because even men destroy themselves in the end. Because if they go through so many women that they think, well, I can never stick to just one, it would be, so hellish and a nightmare, then even these men who would have been considered a good catch make it impossible for themselves to marry and stay, sustain a relationship, with the consequence that they also die childless, like those feminists that they might mock.
Yeah, there is a lot of consequences that people don't realize, that a lot of women are childless, and there's going to be a massive, isn't it half of women, more women are childless than not at over the age of 30 or something ridiculous like that. Like society is really collapsing at the moment.
Yeah. So the whole idea I mean, the way to fix it, I mean, they're whinging about immigration all the time and thinking, oh, why are they doing it? Is it the Jews and whatever? It's like, well, it's because you're not producing enough of the next generation to enter the labor force. It probably isn't anything particularly sinister. It's just that the job's to be done and you won't do it. And your government can't wait around for, couples to have enough children and educate and train them properly, etc. They need their labor force now. And once they start, they'll think, well, there's no point waiting for them to produce, or we'll just keep importing labor. And so the real problem is never solved, because it's like, well, you're a society, aren't you supposed to have a working class? And it's like, well, yes and no. I mean, we don't even know what the answer is, but they're not dealing with it at root. They're just saying, well, we have a labor shortage, we'll just import some more. And obviously the sort of anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, racist working classes can't cope and they don't like it. But then, they're
it's just scapegoating. When you can't do anything, you just try to bring other people down if you can't do anything yourself. So
scapegoating is a waste of time, because while you blame others, you're not solving the problem. You're not
solving your own
problem.
Yeah, well, I would say the problem's getting solved, and you're getting left behind. If you're this white person who's just complaining all the time, you can complain all you want. The problem's getting solved, but the way the problem's getting solved is you're becoming irrelevant, because the immigrants are going to take over your jobs, whether you like it or not, because they have to be there. And if they don't come, your society is going to collapse and you're going to die anyway. So they're going to come anyway. There's no two ways about it. You can't stop it. You need them there anyway. So I suppose that's that.
Yes, and the thing is that they can solve the problem by making marriage a good bargain for white men again. Because, I mean, obviously,
I think the root is deeper, because white men are not taking the responsibility seriously in the first place.
Because they're behaving like women. They think somebody else is going to come around and solve their problem. And basically,
so let's take J.B. Vance as an example, a white man who's kind of given up on marriage, right, and complaining a lot. I talked to him once. I do love him, by the way. This is just like not out of hate or something. I think about people like him, and I think, what can we do to convince him? And listen, J.B. Vance, I can't remember, John Vance, right? It all boils down to a real solid belief in God. I think people who don't believe in God, if I to really boil it down to the one big issue that I see, is that when you don't believe in God, you're so brittle. Like life has no meaning, there's no purpose, and everything makes you collapse. Do you know what I mean? Like you just can't do, you're not capable of anything. So you need that fundamental
nothing
thing.
Long term. Yeah. They won't do anything difficult. They just want to press a button and for the drink to be served. If there's any sacrifice, any inconvenience, they're not going to do it. Yeah. So they can't embark on any long-term undertaking.
And the way I want to, exactly. It's a big commitment that's difficult, unless you have a good. So somebody was talking to me, and this guy who was like, he was saying to me like, do you consider yourself strong? And I say, I don't consider myself strong, but I have these ideas of purpose, and I have systems of action that let's say order in my life that Islam creates, that makes me build and become really powerful compared to everybody I know, like especially people who are not Muslims or don't practice. So I don't really feel powerful individually through willpower, but just through beliefs and systems, you become really, really powerful. And
because you have a roadmap, you have a compass, you have an itinerary, and they have nothing
Nothing.
except
Yeah.
the mood of the moment.
That's right. You're a slave to your moods, right? So, the things I enjoy, and this is kind of really important, I enjoy putting just another brick every day. I really enjoy it. Like when I say another brick, it's like I'll learn another thing. And that's great. I'll do 5 minutes every day, and that's another Islamic teaching. And I'll write another piece of code, line of code for me, another piece of software that I'll use in the future, and it'll earn loads of money in the future, right? So it's like just doing it step by step because I'm not panicking. I'm just like Islam teaches me like this could be your last day. Add value every day. That's success. But if you think like that, you actually build a lot more than panicking and wishing that you're already successful, which is the white mentality. It's like we used to be imperialists and everything, and how comes the rug's been pulled under our feet and we're not powerful anymore? It's all unfair. If you had the attitude that you just work every day and improve on things, and marriage is like that as well. It's like there's no such thing as love in the beginning of marriage in the normal sense, besides some element of lust, which I don't want to say go away, but it's not the thing that binds people together. If I just met you and you said I'm a really kind person, I've done nothing kind towards you, doesn't make any sense. Love is when you actually do the act of love and being kind and caring and being patient for a long period of time. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's like people have it the wrong way around. They think they're in love right from the beginning, and then it diminishes, and all they proved is they didn't have any love in the first place, because all they want is they have high expectations and they're too eager to run away. Like what's his name was saying, women have, women bounce or run away, but it's exactly the women in Western society are just a reflection of men in Western society. It's impossible. I mean,
the treating.
Where do they learn it from? Their dads.
The dating apps, I think, because all the dating apps tell them that there's somebody better around the corner. So men and women will treat each other as disposable.
That's true as well. Yeah.
All these dating apps are saying, try this new thing now. If you're not happy with your previous, we're going to find you someone better. And if not, there'll be a new dating app that will make a different promise that will, seduce you. So
that's right.
So they encourage never to settle.
Yeah, and it's this constant anxiety. What if I picked the wrong person? And I suppose I do want to wind it up with a few ideas. And I suppose this is a really important idea. I don't know if I mentioned it somewhere. Did I mention it somewhere? But there's a very important idea in the Quran that says good women are for good men. There's a longer verse. But essentially, in the West, we're hoping magically to find the right person. And they don't realize their job is not to find the right person, but to be the right person. What does that mean? Essentially, like attracts like. So honest people attract honest people. Liars attract liars. How do we know that? Think about it logically. What is the mindset of a liar? A liar lies because they want short-term results. And they enjoy the short-term results. They think they get away with something. They don't realize the long-term picture. And they won't like an honest person because they'll be like, oh, why did you tell the truth? We could have run away with £10. They don't realize they lost £1 million in the long term, So people with the same sort of values attract each other, and people with different values don't attract each other. And so the very important lesson here is that if you want to, first of all, you want a good person, because that's where true beauty, long-term beauty is. If you don't, that might sound all wonderful, but very quickly you'll realize, like most white people, including John, are realizing, if you look for appearances and whatever, then you'll find out they're pretty nasty inside. People, I'm increasingly I know it's true, but the more you scratch under the surface and find out about people, you see how incredibly disturbed and unhappy people are. And that disturbance is because you're not doing the right things. People who are doing the right things are all, they have peace because you know you're doing the right things for the right reasons. It's built into how we're made, right? So, like, I suppose my point is that first of all, you want a good person because those people are solid people that you can have a relationship, and they actually have real beauty and the kind of beauty that makes a relationship work, which is kindness. And if you're not a nice person, I mean, I think you get the idea. You don't want to be you don't want a person who's just good looking, supposedly good looking on the outside. And I suppose I'll throw in another idea. I'm doing a lot of talking here. What do you think? Okay, I'm going to throw out this idea, right? So I've already said the idea that like attracts like. Let me ask you about that. What do you think about that? Does that make sense? We're going way over our usual time.
Opposites attract. There's another saying: opposites attract. So that
well,
might contradict what you just said.
Okay, so we did talk about a kind of opposite, didn't we? In the beginning, we talked about
being complementary.
Complementary, but that doesn't mean we're opposite principles. I think some of these phrases, they're kind of childlike level phrases that don't really have much value. When you say opposites attract, yeah, opposites attract certain kind on a certain level, but the people who are saying it are people who've got their track record of relationships are so bad that they didn't really understand where to apply that philosophy. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, if you're a Westerner, you don't have the slightest clue what a relationship is statistically. So when you hear opposites attract, you might say everything opposite attract, opposite principles. That doesn't work. You have to have the same principles, and ideally you want good principles, because you don't really want to be stuck with a nasty person. You'll find out, as most white people are realizing, if you're stuck with a nasty person, it doesn't matter how good I don't know, apparently they look and whatever, that's not going to, you really don't want to be that person.
Well,
you start hating. Yeah, go on.
Yes, I'm trying to think of Johnny Depp and that woman who hated
Amber
his
Heard.
ex-wife.
Yeah, who did a crap on his pillow and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's something mentally disturbing. So you'll find that people are not good are really nasty people to be with. And I think like that we've done this Western experiment where people are just falling in love, whatever, with the surface. The thing is, people who are really unhappy do have to spend a lot of time on the surface to look attractive, right? So you have to be aware of that. So that's that idea. I suppose was there another idea? I can't remember. There's some other idea, but anyway, yeah. So that's plenty of ideas. I don't know, what is the last thing we could kind of wind up with, so people can, like, a takeaway that maybe somebody out there like John Vance might come back and start liking human beings or something, and give relationships another chance. What do you think?
Well, I think what is necessary for white men to do in order to save themselves is to acknowledge the necessity of marriage, but because they have jaded themselves through, cheap sex, they can't bring themselves to think of marrying any woman. And I said, look, if you want marriage to be a good bargain, you'll have to abolish no fault divorce, and they can't even do that because it's too much like hard work. Who are they going to campaign? How many years is it going to take? And they can't be bothered with all that.
So I like the idea. I like this idea. They're jaded by relationships from cheap sex, right? So there's a verse of the Quran, I know, you sent me earlier on, right, about do not marry an idolatress, because she will call you to hell. So an idolatress can mean different things, but basically somebody who doesn't has partners with God. Like if you think if you value something more important than God, like you have to sell a book or whatever it is, or self-importance of any sorts, that's idolatry, right? And what the Quran says is go for a believer. And if you go for a believer, you'll be all right. But if you, and that's what you see with religious people, they don't have the same issues with, oh no, women are terrible, men are terrible. No, some women are
Yeah,
terrible,
because
some
it
men
was
are
like
terrible.
your wife saying,
Yeah,
because you're both Muslim and you agree on what the Quran says, she would have to agree with you that men are in charge because the
yeah,
Quran says so.
yeah.
But
And
if you
also,
marry,
yeah,
if your wife were atheist, you'll say like, well, I don't care what God, what God says. It's all.
yeah, and you'll be running off in different. I don't care why you in charge. I want to do anything I feel like. I'm going to have a relationship with X, Y, Z. What are the rules? Who cares? There are no rules. That kind of thing. You got disaster. Um, yeah. So I think if you have somebody who's really confused, and you will be confused if you don't have Islam, you're gonna. I mean that confusion is really gonna break you. Is breaking all of Western society at the moment. And do you want to be in a relationship with somebody who's really confused? It's not a good idea. So I suppose just choose wisely. Come back, find some Muslim, and marry that Muslim, and you'll be all right. You won't have those kind of issues.
Or at least call for the right kind of moral system that would support the life you want to lead. That's all you. I mean, that's what. Well, that's what I'm trying to do. Basically, it's like
mm,
you can't build your house on sand,
mm,
and your house needs to be on, I don't know, principled foundations, so you can agree on the ground rules. And this is
yeah.
what a moral system is. It's like, well, the official moral system of this country is, blah blah, and
Mm,
you might not agree with it, but it's official, so people know what the rules are, even if people break it.
mm.
And that, I think, is the necessary understanding to even begin to restore social and moral order again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so you're talking about you need ground rules, you need order. And so I'm going to make my last comment. You make your last comment based on what you said as sort of a reminder. I'm going to say this again. Like everything starts working when you have a very clear belief in God. People think that's a theoretical idea, but it's the foundational idea that distinguishes between the relationships that work and the relationships religious relationships tend to work. The non-religious relationships are not working. Now people don't like that. They'll say, oh, how do you know what works and what doesn't work? Well, the ones that are having children, the ones that are sticking together. And then they'll make this circular argument that says maybe all the religious people are being persecuted into and being forced into their relationships, and therefore those relationships don't exist, but they've got no evidence of it,
But
right?
it's
It's a
actually true
circular
what they
argument.
say about that. It's like, yes, religion does terrify men and women in their 20s to marry each other and have children and then stick with their original choice. That is the purpose of religion. In all the other religions, like,
I would
all,
like to word it slightly better than that. You get your priorities. I'm going to simplify as that. So if your priority is career, you get your career. And this is what a lot of Western women are finding. They get their career, but the relationship and marriage and family are second place, and they don't get that. They don't realize it just doesn't happen. There's many articles also happening to men as well. Everybody thinks it will just happen. It doesn't happen. If it's your priority, then it happens. So when I was 23, or before I was 23, I was like, okay, I don't want to be adulterous, I don't want to do this, I don't want to sex outside married, I've got to do this thing. I suppose I had this fear of God that I didn't want to do the wrong thing. Yeah. So I suppose there's so many things, but it's all tied in with this God idea of God. And I mean, just because I feel like it's really sad how the whole of society is falling apart. If I could just home in this idea of if you only believed in God, everything else just comes together. When you don't believe in God, then life is meaningless. There's no point to anything. And literally people say they can make up meaning in their life. But you can't make up meaning if on one side of your brain you've already accepted there's no meaning because the world is random and there's no God. Do you get the idea? You can't make meaning if you already told your brain that there is no meaning. And if you have no meaning, then there's no point of anything.
Well, I mean, the thing is, at a very practical level, white people complain mostly about Jews and Muslims. What do Jews and Muslims have? They have religion. And lately they've discovered that Hindus are taking over the West. What do Hindus have? They have their religion that makes them marry and stay together. So it's this ultimately, if you want to have the simplest, easiest to understand reason, religion terrifies people into getting married. And white people used to understand that, but they think they're above that. They think, they don't need to do that. And this is the consequence. It's like, well, then because, when you think, why does everybody in the whole wide world understand the purpose of marriage? Because I guess, if any group decided, oh, well, we're not going to get married, maybe we're going to be a bit gay and transgender and whatever, then their population shrinks and ages, and then the neighboring country will think, oh, the rightful invasion, let's go in and take their stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I think fundamentally it is as Darwinian as that.
Yeah, if you want to talk about Darwinian theory, just look at, like we've talked before, you could say have a survival of the fittest belief. Your belief as an atheist is, you can do anything you want. And look, you're dying out. So maybe your belief doesn't work, And look at Muslims. They've got a belief, whatever it is, X, Y, Z. And they're growing in numbers. So maybe their ideas, evolutionary speaking, I suppose, work. So there's some truth in it.
Yeah. So simplicity and strength works, because the Christians will say, "Oh, but we had, religion, too, in all this Christianity." It's like, well, okay, but it doesn't. You don't believe in it. That's why you can't follow it. Because if you don't believe, this CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's all about reinterpreting a situation, and thinking. So whatever you used to hate and fear, you're supposed to welcome it as an opportunity to whatever. It's sort of like if you get angry stuck in traffic, instead of getting angry and banging on the steering wheel, you can use it as an opportunity to, I don't know, listen to something you like on your radio.
Yeah. So you see, those ideas don't really work unless you have religion. Okay, and this ties into marriage. Like sometimes things don't work out how you like, but if you think so, you can't. If you're mentally retelling a story and saying this is a more positive way of looking at it, whatever, you can really, as a Muslim, you always do that. I think I shared a saying with Prophet Muhammad with you as well. Like everything that happens to a Muslim is for their benefits. If something good happens, they're thankful for it. If something bad happens, they deal with it with patience. But the idea is that they deal with patience for a reason, because it's for their benefit. There are essentially no accidents. There's always just lessons to be learned. But if you think the life is pointless, it's really hard to do this mental exercise of just reinterpreting everything. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't. It's not so easy, but for a Muslim, it happens more naturally because you don't.
Yes, I think we were discussing this thing about Jews being supposed to thank God for misfortune.
Yes. And then I was saying Muslims have the same idea.
Opportunity of learning or kind of cleansing, because they see suffering as a cleansing experience, like paying for your sins by suffering.
Yeah. Suffering is just like cleaning out, like you say, cleansing. Yeah, it's like you screwed up. I suppose it's kind of like exercise, isn't it? You might consider exercise pain, but you got fat, you ate too much, You had to do exercise. God doesn't randomly just punish you. It's just like he creates situations where you can rehabilitate your soul. You don't know how much damage you're doing to yourself, and God gives you opportunities to grow again or fix all your mistakes. And I suppose if I want to tie that, if you don't have that belief, you're so brittle and so weak, you just can't deal with anything in life. That's what I noticed. And then you can't deal with marriage, which is a relationship for grown-ups.
Yeah.
And if you're not a
no
grown
pain,
up,
no gain.
yeah, if you're a man child, or I don't know what the equivalent of is for a woman, right? And you've not developed spiritually, then you cannot handle marriage. I suppose I want to wind up there. I suppose there's a lot of very really important ideas. I hope somebody's understood something out there. I suppose I'll let you have the last word. I mean, if from all our discussions, rather than bring up a new idea, what was the most powerful idea in this discussion that might help people? You can pick whatever you feel like. Just
Well, the
maybe
soulmate
summarize.
thing you were talking about,
Yeah.
I think maybe you could expand on that a bit more.
Yeah, for the people who missed the first bit. So essentially, there's a lot of evidence to show that, well, first of all, God must exist, but there's this idea that we know there's something about nature that attracts us. And if you reflect on it, you realize that we have an inherent attraction towards God, right? It's very hard to get away from that if you study a bit of psychology and whatever. So you realize that it is God that's our soulmate. That's the only perfect creation, and we have an inherent attraction to that beauty of God. And once we realize that very, very important idea that religious people understand, then we stop wanting to make human beings God. And that's an impossible expectation that romantics have. And that's why the relationships cannot last, because no human being is godlike. No human being is perfect. You're incredibly flawed. Okay, so if you're incredibly flawed, anybody who likes you must be incredibly flawed. And just because by virtue of being a human being, they must be incredibly flawed, and you must be completely stupid to think otherwise. But why do we, just to bring home in this idea, why do we try to, when we're in love, like have this idea this person's perfect, they're going to complete me and all this kind of rubbish? No
There's
human
even a
being's
song,
gonna,
isn't it?
is
You
there?
are everything, everything is you. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Do
Right,
you know
yeah.
that one?
I vaguely remember it, but I mean there's
You
so
are
many.
everything, everything is you. Whoa.
I do
Marvin
remember
Gaye
it.
and
I'm not
Diana
saying,
Ross, I think.
yeah, I do vaguely remember it. I'm sure there's so many romantic songs along those lines, right? But
Mm.
you make the point really well. Like, how can anybody be everything? That's just like, that's a godlike status. We don't realize we're giving other human beings godlike status, but it's not by accident. Because I'll read it again, I suppose, just to wind up. It was like, the same attraction comes to interplay whenever a person feels love for another is a reflection of the attraction that is inherent in man's nature towards God, as if he is in search of something that he misses, the name of which he has forgotten, and which he seeks to find in one thing or the other from time to time. Like, we fall in love with this person, then we realize, oh, they're not perfect. We fall in love with another person, and we fall in love with another thing and money and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so a bit of reflection makes us realize that it's God that we own. It's only God that has that amazing beauty that's reflected in nature that we're so attracted to. And then once we realize that, we put the pressure off human beings, and we're able to love flawed human beings in the way we can love a human being. But if we treat human beings or expect them to be perfect and godless, then we can never. I mean, like God, then we can never love them and make it impossible to love them if that's the standard they have to be. And so that makes, so they can't be our soulmate, but they, what I've described as, they should be our crewmate as in, like one of many relationships that have different functions. Obviously, the sexual relationship and the that creates children, whatever, that's a special kind of relationship. But it doesn't mean that's everything. It means you should also have different friendships, so you don't put a burden on your husband or wife of being everything, like the song goes, right?
Mhm.
It just makes it impossible, and that's another massive reason why so many relationships are failing. Because basically, if you live in an individualistic society where the statistic goes that nowadays people in the West have 0 people they can depend on. Like there's a like people are asked, is there anybody? It used to be in the 50 years ago, you might have 3 or 4 people you can, if you have a crisis, you can depend on, right? Now people have no relationships. They don't care about their parents. They don't care about their brothers and sisters if they have them, right? And so they take the lazy way out. They find one person and they expect that one person to be everything because they're too lazy and too selfish to have a decent, meaningful relationship with other human beings, their neighbors and stuff like that. They might have a stupid kind of relationship where they go to a football match and they chant and they go hoo, hoo, hoo. But these are not meaningful conversations. You're just saying my tribe that is randomly selected as Manchester United is better than this other tribe that is Liverpool, which has no meaning, and all you're doing is kicking a ball of air around. It has no meaning. This is not a relationship. It's just I don't know what crap that is, right? But it's kind of some low-level tribal stuff that people hang on to because they're too lazy to have a decent, proper relationship. And so, yeah, so no human is your soulmate. God is. That's the only thing that will give you peace.
I think there's a verse in the Quran that talks about God being a friend, which I thought was surprising.
Interesting.
But I'll try to dig it out. But I suppose it's
describe it more.
People talk about having a relationship with God, don't they? And they sort of talk about how best to do it, and I think there is a kind of internal dialogue with God.
There's a roadmap that God gives you to have a relationship with Him. God also gives you all sorts of challenges in that sense. It says, "It is in the remembrance of God that hearts can find comfort." So it's a really simple challenge. Like, if you really want to know if God is the answer, then just pause for a minute and contemplate on a realistic idea of God, not God as a cow or a cat or whatever, but the one all-powerful creator of the universe, which is the most reasonable idea of God. And suddenly you'll start finding peace. That's a challenge. If it doesn't work, then walk away. Forget Islam, right? But also God gives you a way to develop a relationship with God. It says, when my servant asks you about me, tell them I am near. And then he tells you, like, if you pray to me, I'll listen, all this kind of stuff. He promises that. But you have to be a servant, not like I flick my finger, I've never listened to you, God, do some magic show, prove to me you're right. That's not how it works. You're the slave, not God. So there's all sorts of things about that, and God, inherent in that verse, there's so many beautiful things that Prophet Muhammad expounded on. He said, for example, if you take one step towards God, God will take 10 steps towards you. If you walk to God, God will run towards you. And that's kind of fundamental of the Quranic teaching, which is God is the most gracious, the most merciful. That means the most gracious means like He will give you so much for free, and if you do a little bit of effort, the word merciful actually means the most rewarding. It's a more accurate description. So God is eager to help you or listen to you, close to you, if you make a little bit of effort. So that's a lot of talking. I really appreciate your time, Claire. We really should stop, shouldn't we?
I suppose.
But I think we packed in a lot.
Yes,
sorry, go
yes.
on.
I think a lot of issues came up, and I think, well, hopefully, people will find it useful. I certainly have.
Brilliant, yeah. I always go by the philosophy: if you can save the life of one person, it's like saving all of humanity, both the biblical and Quranic teaching. So if there's one person out there who's benefited, that is more than enough. So I really hope there's somebody else out there who gained something. If you've got some questions, do ask. I'm always looking at the comments and trying to respond and give you individual attention. I'm eager to help. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Claire. Claire's always fantastic. I asked her last minute and she said yes to doing this live stream, which makes it far more valuable than me talking by myself. It's not very easy to talk by myself. So I appreciate you, Claire, very much. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.